Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Discover new strategies and tactics as Susan Solovic interviews today's top business leaders and entrepreneurs to reveal their stories and insights. And now, the host of the 1% Edge, business expert Susan Solovic.
Hi, and welcome to the 1% Edge podcast. I'm Susan Solovic. Thanks for tuning in for this episode. I don't know about you, but I watch the news sometimes and I wonder what in the heck is going on in this world. I mean, you just look at what has happening in Washington, D.C. Nobody can come to an agreement on anything. It just sits there and nothing gets done. And quite honestly, I have seen businesses actually implode because the two founders or more founders just simply can't come to an agreement. And as a result, the business fails. Well, in today's crazy, fast-paced world, you don't want that to happen to your business. But how do you get around it? It seems like conflict is everywhere. Well, my guest today, many of you know, he's been on my show before, Bob Burg. He and his partner, John David Mann, have come out with a new book. It's called The Go-Giver Influencer, a little story about a most persuasive idea. It's the next book in their series of The Go-Giver, and I'm sure you all are very familiar with the Go-Giver series. If you're not, you should be. Bob, thanks for joining me, and congratulations on the new book.
My pleasure. Great to be back with you, Susan.
So I do want to start off on a little question, though, because you and John David Mann write these books in a unique way. They're actually storytelling. So why did you pick that format?
Well, I was always a how-to author. All my books had been how-to, and but I'd always read a lot of parables throughout the years, and I loved them. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take the basic premise of my biggest book at the time, which was called Endless Referrals, Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales. And the premise of the book was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. And how could we take that, maybe put it into a parable? Because parables as stories, they connect. You know, stories tend to connect. And once you make that connection, then it's so much easier to get the point across. Plus, parables are shorter, they're quicker, they're easier to read, and so forth. So I thought, the basic idea of that is that people who develop those kind of relationships, the know, like, and trust relationships, these are people who are always giving. They're giving value. Their focus is on giving value. They tend to move from that I focus or me focus to that other focus, which is, in business, that's what it's all about, because ultimately the customer is king. I mean, they're the ones that ultimately decide if they're going to buy. And so I actually called John David Mann, who was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I used to write for, and I knew he was a brilliant author, and I asked him if he would be the lead writer and storyteller, because, I'm a how-to author, right? That's different from writing. And once he got permission from his fiancee, now wife, Anna, he went with it. And I say permission because he always says, he doesn't make a move of importance without her. And at the time, they actually were about to move. He was about to go to Hollywood and start writing screenplays and so forth. And he and Anna were ready to move and, go out there. And he said, this really just seems like kind of a good project. And, I know Bob has done some, good things before. And so because of that, we were able to, so thank you, Anna. We were able to get together on that. And now we're on the fourth book in the series, the third parable.
Well, that brings me to my next question, and that is because the other books also talk about influence. So why did you focus just on influence in this book?
Yeah, influence indeed has been a part of all the books. It was Law 3 in the original Go-Giver. In the Go-Giver Leader, it was part of the title because leadership is influence. This time we decided to really drill deep into that concept of influence. When you think about it, influence on a very, very basic level can be defined as the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. That's the definition. It's not the essence of influence, though, and this is what we wanted to get across. The essence of influence, Susan, is really about pull as opposed to push, as in, how far can you push a rope? And the answer is not very far, at least not very fast or very effectively, which is why great influencers don't push. They pull. They realize that great influence is an attraction. Great influencers attract people first to themselves and only then to their ideas. How do they do that? Well, it's not through what we see, and you were mentioning earlier, so much of the vitriolic, insulting type of behavior that we see on TV or that we see online, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's
Someone
terrible.
makes a statement and people say, "You're the worst human being." Nowadays, if you disagree with me, not only are you wrong, but you're evil,
Right.
And so, what happens is you don't persuade people that way. You don't influence that way. You may temporarily feel good about yourself and give yourself a quick shot of dopamine by having said what you get something out of your system, and you have your amen corner saying yeah. But nobody's ideas are being changed or adapted in any way. And when you influence correctly, okay, you can move people to thinking and acting a different way. Of course, you need to do it in a benevolent way. Otherwise, it's manipulation. That's not what we're talking about. But to influence, hey, nothing happens without influence. None of the great ideas, none of the great inventions ever took place without someone being able to influence people to try it.
I love your definition because influence often has pejorative connotations to it, because people think, lobbyists, they have influence over politicians. So you think, well, it's power and money and your position. But the way you have presented it here, it's not about that at all.
Right. And so, yeah, anything like that is manipulation. If you're on K Street, how are you getting these people to do your bidding for you? You're doing it through, promising them something else or through donations or through something, or maybe, a job afterwards, or there's all these sorts of ways that are not legitimate ways to do things. Plus you're asking that person to operate outside the Constitution. So you're asking them to actually do something that's not what they should be doing. Right. So I look at that as manipulation,
sure,
as opposed to positive persuasion.
Well, you've got some great characters in the book. I really enjoyed that because, one of them's a little startup entrepreneur, so naturally I would like that.
Yes, him, yeah.
But I think it was really fascinating because the entrepreneur was asked, what do you want and what do you love? Mm-hmm. And I thought those were really great questions. Why is that so important?
Well, I mean, I think, and this is what Judge Celia Henshaw, one of the two mentors in the story, was talking to Jackson about, the startup guy. And because he really needed to kind of get a handle on what he needed to accomplish, because he wasn't exactly sure where he should be going with this thing. And she said, well, what do you love? What do you love the most? And he went through it. First, she had to kind of pull it out of him a little bit. And then he was telling her about all of a sudden he got very passionate about what he wanted and what he loves, rather, what he just loves, and she said, well, the chances are you want more of that. So, now the question is, how do I go about that? And so I think that's very important.
So the mentors that the characters have, they're both very different. Like you just mentioned, the judge. There's also a coach that is mentoring one of the characters in the book too, who is working for this big company. And I thought it was interesting that he talks about the winning strategy for getting your life on track. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, it was sort of, we had the coach, George, and the other mentor, the retired judge, Celia Henshaw. They kind of were talking about the same thing, but they were coming at it from two different viewpoints. Coach George was saying the winning strategies for life. He was making it much more general, with Judge Henshaw, who came from a negotiating background, being an attorney and being a judge. He was being very, specific about it. And the reason we did this, and again, this is John David Mann's genius, how he pulls things together like this, where we have two main characters who are coming at it from two totally different points of view. We wanted the two mentors to come at it from two different points of view. But really, when you get down to it and it gets to the end, you realize they're really not different at all. They're just different ways of approaching a similar outcome.
So, and also one of the coaches made the comment about mastering your emotions, and I thought it was really very nice that they, I don't remember which one right now, but they said, be calm and just breathe.
You're right. Yeah,
Take a breath. Yeah.
George said that, and he was talking. Yeah, just sometimes we forget about that, right?
Yeah.
And just and the idea was what we really need to do is be able to master our emotions. That doesn't mean that we deny our emotions or that we we forego our emotions. Of course not. Emotions, first of all, they're a nice part of life. They bring us good feeling. They make life worthwhile, bring us joy. And emotions can also be a very valuable part of our sense of wisdom. Emotions bring wisdom. But we need to make sure that our decision-making, Susan, is done through the logical part of the mind, not the emotional part. Judge Henshaw gave the example to Jackson. She said, make believe you're a company. Well, a company has a board of directors and a CEO. The board of directors is your emotions. The CEO is the logical part of your mind. Now, should the CEO counsel their emotion? Of course, they should take advice from the board of directors. The board of directors has great insights and great wisdom to share. But when it comes right down to it, it's the CEO, the logical part, that needs to make the decision. Sure, we need to consider our emotions. We need to consider the wisdom it brings. We need to consider the feeling that we get about something. But in the end, if we want to create the environment where we're going to have the greatest chances of the best outcomes, we need to make sure it's our logic that's making the decision.
That's really great advice, because sort of like they say, don't ever answer an email when you're angry, right?
That's a perfect point. That's a perfect point right there. Sure.
Yeah, walk away. So what about you also, one of the coaches said, step into the other person's shoes. And, I think that's really important. I say it a little bit differently. I always say, I don't judge people because everybody's got stuff going on in their lives and you don't know. But you're really saying this is an important step in the business world too.
Yeah, well, and it sounds trite, right? Because we've heard it a million times, step into the other person's shoes. But then you think about it, Susan, most of us have different size feet.
That's
so
true.
We can't really step into their shoes. In other words, we all come from different beliefs, different values, different ways of seeing the world, different experiences. We have our own subjective truths based on all these things. So how do we step into their shoes? Well, what we do is we ask questions. And just like you've heard me say before, that selling is, by definition, it's simply discovering what the other person wants, needs, or desires and helping them to get it. Well, how do we do that? We ask questions. And Coach George told Jillian, ask questions. But then he said this. He said, don't just listen with your ears. That's what most people do. That's the surface listening. That's the kind of listening that we do while we're forming our comeback, right? We're thinking what we're going to say in response. What he said is listen with your eyes. Listen with your posture. Listen, he said, with the back of your neck. In other words, put your entire being into listening to this person. Listening simply to understand where they're coming from. And when you do this, two things happen. One, you become more knowledgeable. So you're actually more equipped to be able to get this person what they want, which is how you're going to have them take action. The other thing is, when you listen like this, the other person feels listened to. And who doesn't want to feel listened to and understood? So they're much more likely to feel good about you and to drop their defenses and to be much more amenable to your ideas.
That's great advice too. So when you're talking about stepping in the other person's shoes, you do talk in the book about, people think they have to compromise, they have to give up something, make sacrifices, but that's not what you're talking about.
Or that's a great point. And here's really what it is. People think when you write a book on people skills, if you will, or on dealing effectively with others, that it's about compromise. And we're not saying there's not a time and place for compromise. Of course, there is. But compromise is not the first option we want people to shoot for. Compromise, as one of the characters said in the book, and he said this jokingly, of course, comes from the Latin word for nobody actually gets what they want. Okay? Right. And of course, that's not really what it means, but it might as well mean that, because compromise by its very nature is lose-lose. It means both parties give up something they want in order to keep the peace or to kind of just get things there and get to that, right?
Right.
No, what we want rather than compromise is we want people to aim for collaboration. Collaboration is the old 1 + 1 = 3. It's that bigger pie. It's discovering what each person wants. And when you do that, you may not have to compromise. both parties can often get what they want and actually come away from the situation much better off than they were before. And that's how it should be. So again, time and place to compromise, sure, but that's not the goal.
And you also speak about positive persuasion.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, you can influence in one of two ways. You could manipulate or you could persuade. And it's sort of like influence is sort of like gravity, okay? Gravity itself is neither good or bad. It just is, right? Gravity exists on Earth. That's indisputable, okay? Now, is gravity good or is it bad? Well, it's good when it keeps us from floating aimlessly up into space. Gravity is bad when we fall off a 7-story building. Okay, well, influence simply is. It's the ability to be able to move people to a desired action. Mm-hmm. It's bad when you manipulate. What is manipulation? It's force. It's control. It's fraud. It's doing things in a way that, could you get certain results? Well, yeah, but it's not the right way, and it's probably not the sustainable way, okay? Or you can persuade. And when you persuade, it means you're tapping into what that person needs, wants, and desires. It means the outcome is beneficial for both of you.
And another point in the book is to set the frame, but I think this is important, not just to set the frame, but be ready to reset if somebody has a real negative attitude.
Yeah. Well, you think about it. What is a frame? It's the foundation from which everything else evolves. Now, let's say you're about to do a sales presentation, and the prospect has kind of an attitude where it's sort of you against them. Now, who knows why? They maybe had an upsetting bad day or an upsetting situation with a salesperson. They, have a sick kid at home. Who knows what is going on in that person's mind. But there's obviously sort of a tension there, and it's if you buy into that frame, well, now it's push versus push. Okay, now it's I'm going to try to do this, and this person's going to do this, and it's two. So let's reset the frame. Okay, let's make her feel more comfortable with the situation. Her name is Mary, and you may say something. You may start by saying, Mary, while we've been able to help a lot of people with this product, whether or not it's the right answer for you, we simply can't know without discovering, without exploring deeper and determining whether it meets your needs. So please know our conversation is simply for us both to discover that. And if it does, great. If not, that's okay too.
And you suggest, and I like this too, that communicate with tact and empathy. We were talking earlier about some of the things on social media. One of our mutual friends, Bob Larry Wingate, he's kind of playing down his social media because of all the negative comments. And, it's just crazy. But people sometimes, they fly off the handle and then boom, it's out there and you can't take it back.
Yeah. Well, my dad has always defined tact as the language of strength. And I've always enjoyed that definition because to me, it takes a strong person to speak tactfully. It takes a strong person to not just react to that email and write something back like you were talking earlier. Right. Pause first and ask, how is what I'm about to say or write? How is it going to affect that other person? What is the result most likely to be? It's the same when you see an online on Facebook, someone makes a political statement and someone writes back, people like you are just the most horrible, awful people in the world. You're looking to ruin this country. You don't like people, what have you. Yeah. Well, you notice when someone speaks like that, certainly not tactfully, not respectfully, the person never responds back by going, thank you so much for pointing out the error of my ways. I hadn't thought about it that way, but right. And so instead, we can speak to people with tact. We can speak to people in a way that's respectful. But we need to understand that tact should never be confused with compromise. We can always speak tactfully and respectfully to others without compromising our values. So, let's say you've got this online person who writes that horrible thing back. Okay, so now let's say you're another person. You're going to kind of go into this discussion. And the person who wrote this, his name was Dave, who wrote that horrible, vitriolic, insulting thing. And what if you, instead of saying to Dave, well, people like you are, what if you instead said, wrote, Dave, I have to say I'm very impressed with the passion you have for this topic, and you seem like the type of person who really cares about others. Like you, I want to live in a country where people are able to, and then you make the point of what you both probably want, right? And say, I think the biggest difference is simply how we would best go about it. So now what you've done is you've reframed this through tact, and you've taken it from, two enemies to, now, you might say, well, wait a second, but this person on who made that original statement, they're not going to apologize. First, by the way, I have seen actually people apologize for the way but they're not going to change their mind. No, they're probably not. Mm-hmm. But I will say this. For every discussion online between two people, there are 10 times as many people who are watching, who are looking. Right. And it's the same when you have a family gathering, or you're at a charitable event or someplace, that there are people around and people are having this discussion. There's always people watching. And Susan, most people are not so far to the left or so far to the right that they can't be reasoned with. Mm-hmm. Most people are somewhere in the middle. They're a little to the left or a little to the right, but they can be influenced. But what they're looking for are two things. One is who makes the most cogent arguments. So you do need to know your stuff. But more importantly, I hate to say this, but more importantly, they're looking to see who presents themselves better, who they like better, who is a person who they can relate to, who is someone who they could ask a question to without getting their head bitten off just because they don't quite agree. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
so
exactly.
With that person, you have that ability to be able to influence people.
Right. And that very quickly, the one other point you make in the book is you have to let go of being right. So you were kind of alluding to that. You just can't be the one that, well, it's my way or the highway.
Yeah, let go of having to be right. It doesn't mean you don't want to be right. It doesn't mean you don't do your best to be right. It doesn't mean you don't prefer to be right. But it means you go into learner's mode. You stay learning, okay? Mm-hmm. Again, when you're that person who, whether you're the boss who will not admit they're being wrong, even though everyone knows they are, okay? Whether you're the politician or you're the person in the discussion, the person who won't ever admit to the possibility they may not be right, they're stuck at the same level of knowledge they are. They cannot improve. Mm-hmm. When you let go of the attachment to having to be right, first, you're able to learn more, which equips you. But secondly, those you're dealing with, they understand they're dealing with someone who is seeking the truth, and they're much more likely to be influenced by them.
That's great advice. That's what I always try to do when you get into political discussions, right? I always try to be respectful and say, well, that's an interesting point, so they know that and try to find that common ground somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, Bob, thank you so much. It's a great book.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Appreciate you being here. Lots of good wisdom in this book. It's a quick read, but it's a great book. So lots of packed good information. Bob, just tell us all where everybody can find you if they want to get a copy of the book and follow you.
Best place is thegogiver.com without the hyphen, thegogiver.com, and they can click on the graphic of the book. It will take them to a page where they can get the first 2 chapters if they like, and then they can always click through if they like what they've read thus far.
Okay, and I'm sure they will, absolutely. And of course, you've got a Facebook page for the Go Giver. You're on Twitter. You're all over the place. So we'll be putting links to all of that as well. So
thank you, Susan.
Thank you again, Bob. Great work.
Always love being with you.
Thanks. And thanks to all of you for tuning into this episode of the 1% Edge podcast. This is the program where I bring you the best of the best so you can become the best. So be sure to join me again next week when I'll bring another amazing thought leader to help you succeed. I'm Susan Solovic.
Thanks for listening to the 1% Edge. If you found these insights and tips helpful, be sure to hit the subscribe button on your podcast player and leave a review in iTunes to help others discover the 1% Edge.